Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, the API Sprint, where we will have our presenters, Gray Taylor from Conexxus and David Ezell. The agenda for today, we'll go through some housekeeping items, introduce you to the presenters, talk a little bit about Conexxus, we'll go into the presentation and leave some time for questions and answers at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available in approximately 7 days. You can access the webinar recording on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ConexxusOnline, or via our website. The slide deck will also be made available. There will be a link sent out for a survey approximately an hour after the end of the webinar. And if you complete the survey, it's very short, it's about 4 questions, just to get to know more about what y'all would like to see in future webinars. The link to the presentation slide deck will be provided to you if you complete that survey. Participants can ask questions via the webinar interface question panel. We do ask that you ask no vendor-specific questions, and our webinars can be used toward PCI continuing education credits. And if you're interested in obtaining a certificate of webinar attendance, please email me at arussell@conexxus.org. And if you have any Conexxus questions in general, feel free to reach out to us at info@conexxus.org. I'm your host for today, Ali Russell. I am the Standards Coordinator for Conexxus, and our speakers are Gray Taylor, the Executive Director of Conexxus, and David Ezell, the Director of New Initiatives here at Conexxus. A little bit about Conexxus. We are an independent, nonprofit, member-driven technology organization setting standards in areas such as data exchange, security, and mobile commerce. We also provide a vision to identify emerging technologies and trends and advocate for our industry, pushing that technology as policy. We have been filling out our 2020 Conexxus webinar schedule. As you can see, our January webinar was presented by RBR for transforming your business through digital transformation. And we will be holding various webinars on PCI compliance, ransomware, POS managed service programs, penetration testing. Next slide. And we'll continue for more PCI and a webinar to be determined in September. Next slide. We would like to thank our 2019 annual Diamond sponsors for the Conexxus Annual Conference, and we would like to invite anybody to attend the 2020 Conexxus Annual Conference in Lowe's Ventana Canyon in Tucson, Arizona from April 26th through April 30th. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any Conexxus staff member or visit our website. And with that, I'll turn it over to David and Gray.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Gray Taylor. I'm Executive Director of Conexxus. I wanted to just kind of kick this off. The real meat of the presentation is what David's going to cover, but I wanted to cover some of the history behind why we're engaged and what we're doing here. Some of you may have seen this graphic from last year's NAC show presentations, and this is what I call the shiny object slide. This is a roadmap that the Conexxus leadership and thought leadership has looked at and said, look, this is stuff that is going to be either forced on our industry or adopted by our industry through desire over the next 4+ years. The change from last year to the year before really was one that measured accelerated adoption. And so when we put every one of these things up here, we look at for instance, IoT web events, that means that there is a commercially viable alternative for a retailer to adopt those types of things. This isn't something from an experimental basis, but something from a perspective of it's available in the general market for a retailer to adopt. What we came up with, though, is that as we looked at all of this, you'll see the big star in the middle, which is APIs. We literally, with our existing tech stack today, will have a very difficult time affecting any of these or all of these innovations within our channel unless we radically rethink the way that our technology stack operates. We have a tech stack that has been built for our known operations. It has evolved over the last 20 to 30 years. Does a really good job of record keeping and reporting, but is not constructed in its current state to foster a test and learn innovation cycle, the ability to change business models, to add business models, all the things that are really required in the fourth industrial revolution economy. So we had to take a step back and say, yes, we want to do this stuff, but we have to take care of some basement business before we start building the house. David, next slide, please. So if we take a look at our basic tech stack, everybody should be familiar with this. We've got 4 core control payments going through a checkout to the back office up to an HQ administrator. What we're really suggesting and what we see is absolutely necessary for us to do some of the IR40 stuff is to really extrapolate and create a central nervous system, a new brain in the organization. And by doing that, we're really talking about how we can structure this legacy data through Exchange APIs that we extract from our legacy tech stack and bring it up in a highly structured fashion. And I want to underline structured. David's going to talk about data dictionary. Without the discipline of having a data dictionary while we do this, we will be creating not a data lake, but a data cesspit. And what we really need to do is make sure that data is labeled correctly so that when we get down the road and start doing some deep analytics, start sharing data with partners, everybody knows what that data is about. Now, once we built this central nervous system, we're now going to start adding innovations, delivery service and payment innovations and so forth. And what we're really suggesting that we do is that those innovations would be added through a central system, either a cloud, hybrid cloud, with innovative APIs that are doing that. That then also allows us, with this new rich data lake up here, to enable our associates, suppliers, and customers to access any data within our organization using some very common data API structures. It really then becomes up to us as to what points we want to let people have access. And while we're at it, we're also going to be leveraging the fact that data will probably increase, data flows will increase about 5x over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's because we're going to be adding a lot more Internet of Things, consumer data feeds, weather, news, forecasts, all sorts of data that adds context to the business intelligence that we're pulling out of our legacy source systems. And then lastly, while we've built out this database and we now have this thing that has got all of this extraneous data that's augmenting our BI data, and we're getting data flows from vendors and customers and other service providers, that now creates a data range that is worthy of machine learning and starting to get towards some predictive analytics. And we can't do this in a proprietary database format. We have to do this in the structured brain format. So this is how we are proposing to rewire the enterprise. And we think that this will take us a long way away from reducing tech debt. Next slide. So if you're not familiar with the term technology debt, this is a great curve. It was actually a marketing term that we used a couple of years ago, but really what technology debt is this. If you take a look at the green line is really the ambient economy technology, primarily in the form of customer technology, what the customer is doing, how they're driving the technology curve. That's a huge difference from where we were 15, 20 years ago. It was not the customer driving the tech curve. It was basically best practices in the organization that was driving the tech curve. Somewhere over the last 10 to 15 years, with all the mobile devices coming out and proliferating in the marketplace, that technology curve pushed beyond us and created what we see as tech debt in that shaded area, because we are sitting there in the blue line with our current technology adoption. Now, this, to take it down to a financial terms, tech debt is an unrealized balance sheet item. And in fact, it will stay off your balance sheet if you're not forced into making a tech investment to meet a competitive threat, or if you have, or if you're about to pivot and add a new business model to your existing business model. So there's no gap reason why you need to list tech debt, but this is something from a managerial perspective that's very important for organizations to start looking at. Some of the causes of tech debt, some are legitimate and some are by omission, but basically we look at failure to use standards and APIs as creating technical debt. If you are, and we've all been in this situation, if you need to get something to market quickly, you write something without any regard to standards or without any regards to future adoption. You just need to get it out to the marketplace. You're willingly creating tech debt, and there's a good reason for that, especially if there's a time to market criticality to the effort. The other thing is taking a platform approach. Everything we do within our tech stack really needs to be run through the lens of, well, where does our platform need to be? And we've defined that platform in a future back analysis, which is really 10 years from now, what does our platform need to be able to do to serve our associates, our customers, our business interests? And if you've taken that 10-year back look and you can define your platform and define the steps that you need to be in your platform, that also gives you a great litmus test then to measure any individual development operations that you're doing today. So really what we're looking at in the tech debt is the true cost of digital transformation. If we can magically match our technology adoption curve to the green curve up there and meet all of our customers' demands as far as technology, we have then sufficiently digitized the organization. But as that curve also indicates, it doesn't flatten at any given point. In fact, it's an accelerating curve. And so we're going to have to continue to invest in that technology to keep up with that curve. And so this is the quandary that we're in. None of us can afford to rip out old systems that are doing reporting and storage just fine. And what we need to do is exactly what the banks did 10 years ago, where they had the same problem. And they had fintech barking at their heels. And what they're doing is they're using APIs around legacy systems that make those legacy systems operate like brand new systems without the cultural and expensive replacement of those systems. So we all have it, and what David's about to talk to you about is how we can reduce our technical debt from a industry perspective. Next slide, David. Little history on APIs. In 2018, Conexxus crafted an idea that APIs was going to be important, that we really needed to accelerate our API migration strategy and get from an XML data structure only to more of a tried and true API structure that had some certification around it and drove us more to a plug and play type of environment, although that's an overused term. The NACS Executive Committee, the governing body of NACS, granted us $200,000 to go out and kick the tires and fund the development of the API strategy. And the whole idea here was to save time and non-recurring engineering expense of digital transformation that we knew was about to hit the industry coming out of our studies of the fourth industrial revolution technologies and some other disruptors that were happening in other adjacent markets. David came on board, successfully brought a group of retailers together and crafted a strategy and some documentation and some processes that we feel will radically and quickly get us into an API economy within the industry. I took those findings to the executive committee in January, and they committed $1 million to fund what we like to call the API factory model, which is really about achieving strategic efficiency through standardized APIs, a la a development co-op. It's a plan that's driven by retailer prioritization, because if you remember earlier, I said customers now are driving our technology demands, not vendors, and the retailer has to serve those customers. So the retailer, like it or not, is now in the middle of determining their own priorities going forward. And we need to greatly enhance our competitive position as an industry. We still remain a highly fragmented industry surrounded by consolidated industries of chain drug, dollar stores, grocery stores, you name it. We need to look and act nimble to those people that are coming up with new innovations for retail. And we need to foster the innovation. Test and learn cycles are absolutely going to be critical. We cannot take 6 to 9 months just to go out and test something new because it needs to integrate tightly to our point of sale. We've got to get more nimble in that regard as well. So we believe this initiative will save the industry millions of dollars. The multiplier here is literally millions of dollars, $50 to $100 million. And more importantly, it should save the industry 5 years of time to market if we can get together and leverage this investment and move quickly, which means you guys need to engage us to help us invest this wisely and direct where we're going to make these investments. It's got to tie to your own internal strategies or else it's worthless to you. So that's what we're really asking here. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to David, and he's going to walk through the nuts and bolts of what we're doing here. So David?
So good afternoon to most of you, or good morning to some of you. Thank you for joining us. It looks like a pretty good crowd out there. We have crafted our API sprint to attempt to leverage as many of the Conexxus standards as we can and to focus on this data dictionary concept. The data dictionary, as Gray said, helps make sure that the data lake is immediately useful for a variety of applications. You can end up with a data lake that requires a lot of consulting time to try to normalize data sets, to normalize the way things are named. And so the data dictionary is going to play a really big role in getting things moving quickly. Another part of what we're doing here is we're upping our investment in technology and in management talent in Conexxus. Many of you know that Conexxus, traditionally, we have created standards. These have always been XML standards, and that they but that there is not really any kind of any software, any certification program. If there are any, they're relatively lightweight. So we are upping that. It's going to be much more of an interactive environment with the ability to do proof of concepts on interoperability and even get to conformance testing. So we're going to be supporting all of that, and we also are proposing, with using our existing standards, some changes to the how the architecture has been used in the field up until now that leverages the abilities of APIs. It also leverages the Conexxus standards, and it will, we believe, minimize retailer technical debt. So the API sprint itself, the factory, I'm going to talk about this as sort of a roadmap. We have opened up a new collaborative environment on GitLab. It has two areas. One is for our members, our retailers, and our suppliers. And there is another area, though, that is community. And the data dictionary is open for community review. I'll be talking about that in just a second. And we want to get a broad net out there to make sure that our dictionary serves a lot of uses, including the Conexxus API standards. We are focusing on what Gray has called table stakes APIs, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the architecture that we're proposing that will encapsulate that. Table stakes means that these are APIs that every single retailer needs, regardless of who your vendor is, regardless of who your infrastructure vendor is, regardless of what. There's no sense in creating new technical debt, doing things a different way, when we can have these APIs that allow people to leverage work done across the industry. It also provides a sort of a plug and play type environment, which makes changing out components of the system easier. The table stakes, the reason for doing this and not saying we're going to write every single API, we don't expect Conexxus to create every single API, but by keeping the really common ones common, we make what an old friend of mine used to say about XML. It makes the easy things easy and the hard things possible. It frees up money for investment in specific, disruptive, competitive sorts of things that you want to do, because you're not having to spend a lot of money and time chasing things that should just be easy. I'm going to talk a little bit about how RBR has approved work and what some of our potential new work is. I'm going to talk about the process for APIs because there are two sides to this. One is things that Conexxus is going to create, and the other one is things that we hope our suppliers and our retailers will bring to us, and we can incorporate those into our process. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are staffing for this effort, and what our expectations are, and how we expect to get 32, and I put that in quotes because the number changes by 1 or 2 all the time. It kind of goes up and down. Table stakes APIs certified and in repositories within this year. That's our goal. So first off, we have issued a press release. It's a joint press release with the International Forecourt Standards Forum, IFSF. And IFSF has traditionally handled fuel and convenience retail in Europe. The missions of our two groups have a tendency to merge. I think that would be kind of obvious. The membership of our organizations is slightly different, but the actual end goals are very, very close to the same. So we are collaborating with IFSF, especially within the guidelines for defining APIs and in how we and in the contents of the data dictionary.
And David, I'd like to add on IFSF that the other goal that we have here is that with Conexxus and IFSF, you have the only two petroleum retail-based standards bodies that will be basically issuing APIs that will be used around the world. And that's going to facilitate our ability to identify innovations in other markets and bring them back and more readily integrate them into our own operations. So it's going to really open up a world of innovation for us.
Yes, and we're very, very happy to have them second guessing us at every step of the way, because second guessing is really how you get where you want to be. The API design guidelines, and these are public, so I welcome everyone to go to, I'll actually back up a slide. This particular page, if you type in openretailing.org in your web browser, it should bring that page up, and it's got a link to the API design guidelines. We welcome people to review those. They are in public. And there are those of you who have been trying to implement API systems, API ecosystems for your business know there is more than one way to implement an API. And we have done a great deal of study. We have finally come down to the point that the most open industry standards appear to be the best way for us to do our work, especially those standards that let us standardize the message formats. And the rationale actually goes a little bit deeper if you go on the web page, but the Open API specification used to be Swagger. That's what we're using. JSON Schema 0.7, that's the newest of that, and it appears to be gaining a lot of traction. And finally, there's good old HTML5 in there, especially in the way that we handle events in a pub sub type situation, so that we can handle even through the edge devices on your network, we can handle cloud interfaces that provide events back to your systems. The API data dictionary, as we've talked about, is really a set of terms and what those terms look like when they're in a document. So a date, for instance, has a certain format, and that is made explicit in the dictionary. There are several kinds of dates, like a business date is a key term of art that we care about. We don't want it spelled 15 different ways. So the dictionary explains how that is spelled. Transaction ID is also a term of art. An organization ID is another term of art. So the dictionary is really defining terms of art and the actual format of the data that they point to. And so the dictionary is going to be a big help. We are currently creating our first APIs, the POS activity reporting API, using the dictionary. So the status, just this last weekend, we went live with the dictionary. We have contributions from IFSF. They took their proposed dictionary from their forecourt device controller. And Conexxus, we based ours on the POS back office offering, especially the journal, POS journal. This stat is the 3.6.1 version of POSBO, and it is the latest and greatest that we have worked on. It has been an XML format. We are transmitting or transferring that over to JSON, and we are writing an API to handle that data. Just so that you'll all have a flavor of how this works, for the dictionary, TAC approves the overall structure. They have already done that. FTC the committee at Conexxus will take a closer look at the IFS side of the contribution, and the POS back office committee will approve the Conexxus contribution. Right now, as it says, we're in draft, so they're working actively on all that. So what we're going to talk about are two major sets of APIs that have been key in Conexxus for a while. One of them is the activity reporting, which is both period reports and journal. And we're also the configuration data. That is, the big dog in that is price book. So everybody knows that to configure your system at the store, you have to have a price book, and it is a continual effort to try to keep that price book up to date and competitive. And we have some thoughts on that. So as we propose this architecture, though, there are some reasons we're proposing it the way it is. First of all, if we have based the data on the dictionary, in other words, we have the terms of art and we have the actual content of those terms of art, we don't really need to do a lot of pre-processing. And IR4O, which Gray has talked about at length, these are AI sorts of things that you can do with your data, predictive analysis and all of that. It's lower cost if you use standards. So there's little or no tech debt in getting your data ready for IR4O. It's also more accurate. It's sort of like going back to original sources as a historian. There are bits and pieces of information in some of these files that nobody ever reports, even today, but that they will become useful in the future because they are giving some information that people haven't actually figured out why it's important yet. So we don't want to cleanse the data. We want to keep it as intact as we can. And it makes it more informative because it's not just values and names, it's actually a timeline and what happened when and how did those things match up. One of the problems in our current architecture, however, is that merchants often don't have direct control of their own data. So it may require customization, it requires additional development to actually get to the data. And we believe that retailers should be spending their money either on countering disruption or creating their own disruption and not just getting control of their data. We think that is a table stakes item that we should take care of. So here's where we are today, to give you a flavor. Grossly simplified, we have a POS system and a forecourt device controller. There's usually a store controller that is carrying on the conversation between those things. There is a back office system, which also includes not just collection of data and communicating to the central system, which is the remote box, but also doing store ops so that the manager can do things like enter orders or drops or other things that need to happen. We have standards for connecting the store controller, which is the POS system essentially, to the back office system. That's the POS back office system. And we also have a standard for the FTC. But these are point-to-point connections And there's nothing in there really to help us get where we need to be. Because this is really what's in our future. The POS 1 to however many you've got is in the upper left corner. These things are in yellow at the top because that's what's there today. And we want to manage our price book accounting and reporting and analysis. We can do all of that today. But we also, on the POS side, we want to bring your own device. We want to support a Go Skip or other people who provide that kind of thing. We want to provide an order ahead system that uses the same prices and promotions that the POSs in the store do. We have the need for buying a third-party line buster system. Today, you don't often have, depending on your POS system, you may not have very many options on if you buy a line buster. It may have to interoperate, but these should be able to be used kind of interactively with various systems. One of the things we're not going to talk about today is the fueling point POS, and that is the idea that the screen and keyboard in your fuel pump is really a POS controlling one gas pump. And that has tremendous ramifications on how we're going to manage POSs in our stores. And of course, unattended POS kiosk and that sort of thing. On the right-hand side, we want to allow that data to be consumed in multiple ways. We have some ideas about managing supply chain. There is an effort underway at Conexxus now to get that started. We have systems that do promotions based on letting an AI peruse your data. And you don't necessarily want to have to go through other systems to get that. You want to get it directly. Predictive analysis and operations analysis are some other things we want. So the question mark, how do we do this? Well, there is a saying in computer science, this comes from Edgar Dijkstra, all problems can be solved by another level of indirection, except if you have too much indirection, which probably was a nerd, but it's a great quote because it's absolutely true. And it seems to come up about once a day, at least in my work. So here is what we are proposing. The store and remote boxes are what came from the slide with the question mark. And the interfaces, PDCA, which are red on orange, and PARA, these are the APIs that Conexxus is constructing. These APIs are based on the data dictionary that we talked about, and they make it possible to pull and push data from various controllers that handle this data using those APIs in a very plug-and-play sort of fashion. So where are these controllers? A lot of people worry about who is going to manage those controllers. Where are they going to be? What happens if my network goes down, for instance? Well, depending on the situation, some of these controllers that have APIs that the other systems talk to might actually be in the store. There could be some sort of a server in the back office, or there could be a Raspberry Pi. It could be as small as you want it to be, and it could provide local service in case external service goes down. This is innovation that's possible because what we're creating here are APIs, and they can be stacked. So we are not advocating a centralized controller in the store or anything else. We are in the business of creating the APIs that make all of those other topologies work. In going forward, many of these APIs will be cloud hosted. That's sort of the direction where we know we're all going. And we may have existing suppliers that step up and offer to host these APIs in the cloud, making them available to other vendors as the retailer dictates. There may be third-party people, a new line of business that will stand these up. It could be on AWS or Azure, or even on the retailer's own IT infrastructure. So the actual controller is a buzzword that allows us some flexibility in where these activities are hosted. And what is the result of this architecture? Well, it means suppliers control software and they use data from the system and they contribute data to the system. But retailers control the data and who gets to use it. And that's our ultimate table stakes strategy, hopefully reducing tech debt. So how are we getting there? Our Retailer Business Requirements Committee has approved a certain number of APIs. And I just showed you some diagrams that included POS activity reporting and POS data configuration reporting. Drilling down just a little bit on PARA is there are two big halves to that. One is journal, and we are allowing management of that data either at the business interval, most commonly a shift or a day, but we're also going to allow transaction level posting of data in sort of a real-time system. I mentioned PubSub a minute ago, and our architecture with HTML5, we actually allow subscription through these APIs so that if someone posts an event, 3 or 4 different systems might get an event saying you should go fetch this transaction because it just came in. And many systems won't care about that kind of granularity, but some will. Some will want to see it instantly. The same is true of activity reporting, although activity reporting is almost always at the interval level, which is the shift or the day. And I always call these the X and Z reports. We have the summary reports, merchandise code, which are the department and item reports, reports on fuel, reports on taxes collected or forgiven, and what tenders were used to pay for things. These, as the journal gains currency and power, and our computer systems gain bandwidth, the journal becomes much more important as the way to report POS activity. So the POS configuration data, these are the current data sets out there. The site data, which is site asset data on our website. Merchandising data, that is mostly within the POS back office, but we had a B2B group for a while, and we are reviving that for the uses of supply chain. We see merchandising data management as becoming a relatively big tent that we're going to start really expanding. Fuel data management, rack pricing, instantaneous pricing, how do we make all of these things happen quickly? And taxes, of course, that's a little more slow moving than fuel prices, and workforce data management. I'll talk just a moment about this thing called the POS calculator, Cloud POS Calculator. This API will give you the ability to hand off to a knowledgeable engine of some sort a POS journal entry and get back a POS journal entry populated with promotions, with discounts, with the correct taxes configured or charged for where the sale is happening. All of those things can be done. This further streamlines the ability of people to enter the POS market. It also means that the existing vendors can reduce their own technical debt by providing these interfaces to their new systems. I used to work for a supplier, and we had to work very hard to try to replicate all of the fancy stuff we did in our main POS with our newer, slicker POSs. It was a very, very fraught thing. You would always end up with 80%. You'd never get 100% there. So the Cloud POS Calculator is sort of a way forward to help us smooth over some of those rough edges. The forecourt device controller, I think, speaks for itself. Digital offers, we have a pilot with JICC and the Coupon Bureau for, it really brings the CPGs and the end consumer closer together and drives traffic into our retailer stores. And the car wash controller is a device interface that we've had for a while. Other teed up API development, our loyalty and mobile payment systems are popular and ongoing, and so we see APIs quickly for those. We have approved a gift card front-end processor. This is for use alongside credit cards and supply chain, I think I've talked about, and fuel dispenser, POS, which I've also talked about. So how does the process look? This is what we have today. We have the market pushes on us, comes in as standards. We create a standard. There are product specifications that come out of that, and people implement products. With the factory, we are going to begin working on this product implementation. We will do proofs of concept and even compliance testing. We want to be sure that all of the latest versions are supported and out there, and we need innovators driving our agenda, and that's why we're talking to all of you today. Inside the factory, we are going to have these basic tasks. We're going to have program management, project development, and project management. And the things that always get left out, but are really important for APIs, documentation, quality assurance, and support. Documentation includes the creation of tutorials and all kinds of other things designed to smooth acceptance in the developer community. And we expect that we will get contributions from the developer community. So this is the factory, and I talked a little bit in that slide 2 ago about bringing things in through Conexxus. Here is a very detailed chart, which I don't expect any of you to be able to look at, but it's our first stab at accepting donated APIs, and donated APIs can come from anyone, from any supplier or any retailer that wants to develop one. A retailer could actually send one through the system. We are following a process much like they use at ISO. It's called a pass process there, a publicly available specification. We're not going to call it that, but it has to conform to the rules, to the API design guidelines. So if the API submitted conforms to those guidelines, and the second thing is it doesn't conflict with anything we're doing, then we're going to put it in this data lake over here. And once it's in the data lake, people can see it. All of our membership can see it. You can use it, even if you want to, even though it's not a standard. But meanwhile, our committees and working groups may pick that back up and put it through, and we'll make it into a real-life standard as part of the table stakes ecosystem. So how are we going to staff? The roles are as followed. We have an advisory architect role, and I am not including myself in this. I'm sort of the acting architect. I'm the victim architect. John Carrier of IFSF is the victim architect. But we all need sounding boards. So we have an advisory architect role that we need. We also need API definers, API writers, and people who can build the certification and test bed engines, and also a very misunderstood activity, test case development. Absolutely crucial for these APIs. So what we're going to try to do is maintain the core documentation, those 4 documents on the API guidelines. We're going to continue to do research. There was a rationale for why we chose what we did. We may blend in new technologies. That will all depend on research. There will be coordination on submission to the data dictionary, and we will also be creating APIs. When we go to create an API, a lot of times the first 2 steps are going to happen either externally at a vendor or internally with our Conexxus, existing Conexxus committees. The API definition may come from the outside. It may be partly put together by our committees, but at this point, our API experts in the factory are going to pick up the ball and move it through all of the steps that are here. I want to highlight the threat model because we are only APIs. This is important to remember. What the threat model does is explain where the points of vulnerability in the API are so that people can develop the test cases later and also test their implementations. They sort of know where the problem areas might be. The rest of these steps we will move through as we move toward deployment. So what are we looking at for resources? Well, we have our existing staff and we have our existing work group members. But as you all know, the committees don't work all that fast. That's why we need the factory. And our proposed new resources are an initiatives coordinator. We're looking to add this person in Q1. We also feel like we need someone focused on project management, and we're looking at Q2 for that, or sooner if we can possibly do it. Contractors to actually help with the work. We have several options here. We have Orion Tech, who are a member of Conexxus. We have also have REPL, who are working with IFSF. Those are good sources. We also have several other sources for contract work. And some of our retailers may be working with contractors. I'm thinking of Sheets in particular, who seem to have great capability in this area and may be able to help us turn the crank more quickly. And factory developers, actual full-time employees who we hire as development employees, depending on our needs, we're going to do that in Q3. What that leads to is a sort of a burn down of our APIs. You can see up here at the top, we've got Para, and we're in phase 1 right now, hoping to get out the first go round in Q1. We're going to move down into PDCA, the data configuration, Cloud Pause Calculator. They're already looking at that in POS Back Office Committee. Some of these others are already on the stove and burbling, and some of them, after we have our process down, they're going to come on quickly. What is not really that apparent from this chart is that things are going to happen faster and faster as we get the factory online. So the bottom line is we need retailers to demonstrate support for the effort. There are a number of ways you can do this. You could actually put the APIs in your RFI or RFP process and come to Conexxus, provide leadership. We have an API focus group, which is the voting members of retailers, although anyone can join, and it is sort of a steering committee for all of this. We need your active leadership in this committee. And we also need the suppliers. The suppliers are absolutely necessary. In fact, it's sometimes arguable that almost everything good that's happened at Conexxus happened with the suppliers. And I'll pat myself on the back for that, for having been a supplier. Suppliers have to show technical leadership, willingness to reduce technical debt, They have to stay involved in the committees at Conexxus, and they have to be able to move fast because things are happening. And as Gray said before, we really would like for as many of you as possible to sign up for the annual conference and come out there and help us get this started. We'll start it with a party. I can't think of a better way to do it. And with that, Gray, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, David. If you've got any questions, please type them into the question box. We'll try to answer as many as we can. The question was asked, is this being recorded and will it be made available? Yes, it will. It will be available on the Conexxus website under the resources tab, I think in 7 days, what Ali had said. So it will be made available. So please use that. Use this as a resource to socialize it within your own organizations. I also got a question, are the major POS vendors on board with the strategy of using industry standard APIs? I can say that we have not gotten pushback, and we have actually had some conversations with some vendors who have very large repositories of APIs that they've been working on over the years, and have expressed an interest in working with us on getting those standardized. So let me paraphrase that by saying our vendor community is incredibly responsive to the demands of a retailer. It gets back to retailer leadership. If retailers believe that this method of upgrading our tech stack to compete in the disruptive age that we're really facing is important, then they need to communicate that to their vendors and help their vendors understand that this is where we're going. Having been a vendor myself, I would take this initiative very seriously and start designing my product line around an API infrastructure that will give me a leg up and get my product to the marketplace a lot faster. So we haven't gotten pushback, and I would like to think that we're going to get a lot of support from the vendors as we go forward. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any coming through.
Hey, Gray.
All right.
I've seen a question.
Yes, David?
I've seen a question from Kara. I probably didn't explain the role of the Data Security Committee very well.
Why don't we do that?
Okay, so the Data Security Committee has been working with us on the threat model. I did mention the threat model, and we are leveraging the expertise of that committee to help us be sure that we provide a coherent set of APIs that are security certification ready. So when you get ready to do a PADSS certification on a system or something, you will already have a leg up on knowing where the problems could be in those APIs and what the mitigations are for how those things are done. And thanks to our security committee for having worked with us on that.
Absolutely, and you know, key here is that long ago the Data Security Committee made the point that, look, you know, security starts with design, and we have to design data security into the way we do things. And yes, you start to increase your risk a little bit, because we're now saying, look, we're going to connect data points in multiple fashions across multiple networks. Now it's not going to be in a bespoke, you know, store network. And so they've done a great job of coming in with some guidelines, and they will provide ongoing support and oversight as we go through the API factory process. I got a question. There was a discussion about global standards. Can you expand a bit on more on how global this is coming from our creation? So our intention has always been at Conexxus is we have members from Japan, we have members from the Philippines, from Australia. Our standards are available anywhere in the world. IFSF also had members from China, Thailand, and their standards were also being used anywhere in the world. And in fact, some of the IFSF standards are being used in the United States. The idea here was to use APIs, which is a big sea change in the way that both organizations think, to bring our standards and our data dictionary to a singular point, so that now if I am a developer in Malaysia And I wanted to introduce a new, or I'm introducing a new innovation to a retailer in Malaysia. So long as I adopt standards that are coming out of this effort, I then can take and export my innovation to any market in the world, and it becomes very recognizable. So we truly believe this is a huge step forward to creating a singular set of API standards that's going to open up our industry and allow a lot of innovation to cross borders. Another question, when implementing APIs for retail and petroleum ecosystems, what is the biggest hurdle and what is the most time-consuming job? And I'm going to let David answer that one.
Well, the biggest job for us has been, first of all, understanding the literally dozens of different technology stacks available to solve the problem and figure out which one was best and which one could be most understandable to our members. Right now, we're in the process of creating these new APIs to be totally self-explanatory when people start to use them, but the proof will be out there in the uptake. So the hardest of an API as frictionless as possible. And we're trying to do that by adopting the most widely accepted standards that we can, by using terminology that was already there in Conexxus and that had been standardized by Conexxus and IFSF, and so that we don't run into speed bumps of trying to define new things that don't need to be defined. So you said what is the hardest thing is to resist the temptation to stray from that mission of simplification.
Yeah, and I'd like to add also, there's one other quality that we've been working on over the last couple of decades, and that is our engagement with W3C. As we embrace APIs, and which is really the API economy you read about, our work with W3C is keeping us in sync with the rest of the web commerce world. And our philosophy is very simply this: whatever happens in the online world is going to eventually show up in the retail space. And so to the extent that we can, we need to balance off what our standards are and how they interoperate with W3C. And David spent a lot of time at W3C, and we're actually increasing our participation at W3C when it comes to digital promotions, payments, digital identity, and so forth. And so that's another very valuable coordination point that we didn't really touch on. Gotten a couple of other questions coming in here. So where or who is storing the data that is now being able to be captured via APIs? The simple answer to that is anybody you want it to capture. It really is about freeing up the data so it can still run point to point and still do state changes and all of those very verbose things. But it also can run and populate data in a myriad of places simultaneously. So you literally could longevity of JSON, HTML5, etc. Thinking of how different website connectors have changed over time, and now some not available based on website use. David, I'm going to leave that one to you.
And I'll be brief this time. They are still the most popular, most widely adopted. HTML itself is morphing. HTML2 is out now. HTML3 is coming out. And some of the changes to the protocol of HTML are to make it much more powerful in the API area. I don't believe that that's going to go away. There are other parallel efforts at IETF like COAP, and there are some, sort of build from the ground up, like, and these are acronyms, which I can't remember the names for, AMQP and MQTT. These are other ways people are doing IoT connectivity, but we don't see them supplanting the the sort of top level table stakes type API initiatives that we need to do, at least not immediately. Also, one final thing, those APIs can be wrapped in such a way that the standard can work across them, in which case actually having to choose between A and B is not something you have to worry a whole lot about.
Okay, thanks, David. Great question here. Traditionally, the toolkit has primarily consisted of standards definitions, and the implementation has fallen to suppliers and retailers. Does this represent a change in target for those standards within the factory there to accelerate the definition, or do we see any technical platform infrastructure coming out of the factory? Great question. Actually, it's falling short of any new platforms coming out of the factory, but we do want to enhance a couple of things. We have been made aware that that consistency in the most current standard of our old XML standards was a problem in the industry. Technically, yes, a vendor could be Conexxus, support Conexxus standards, but when implementation came, let's say POSBO, where the vendor only supported 2.6 and the customer was expecting the in the DevOps website as well, where you can start developing and testing. The whole idea is that we want to provide online tools that will allow people to utilize a candidate API and test against the certification engine, and then would get a certification to that version of that API, so that there is a better quality assurance for consuming the APIs as it goes out into the wild and is actually being deployed. So we do expect that this is going to make take a lot of the overhead of implementing the toolkit or traditional toolkit from retailers and vendors and make it more of an automated process where we can get you into the market much faster. How do we get POS vendors to be more responsive to certify APIs? It seems to be a bottleneck. Well, yeah, and you bring up a really great point. We have this little thing called EMV that's kind of hanging over everybody's head. I suspect that as we get to the end of the EMV certifications, and we're making good progress along those lines, that this will be taken up as a priority for our major POS providers. And quite frankly, I think it'll also create an entry point for other POS providers to come into this industry. It's going to open up the landscape quite a bit. We do have to choke down that big thing called EMV, and that is rightly so our #1 priority. So I think once we get through that, I think we can see some pretty healthy attention to this. Another point was made, not only the POS vendors, but also the fuel brands. Yes, this is going to be a highly collaborative effort. Retailers are going to have to work with their fuel brands and express in no uncertain terms what it's going to take for those retailers to survive and thrive in the new retail age. I've talked to several of the major oil companies. They're looking for ideas. They understand that there needs to be some give and take, especially when it comes to mobile commerce solutions that are being offered, especially when it comes to store formats and some of the business models that are being run through those stores. And not only that, we're also, we need to target some of our QSR brands that we share our locations with. So we have these very close trading partners that will need to comprehend and design into their marketing programs new flexibilities that allow us to really do what we do well, which is sell time back to consumers. So great question there as well. We have reached the 5 minutes over our allocated time. I'm going to bring this one to a close. Final slide up here. Here's how you get a hold of us. By the way, follow us on Twitter and follow us on LinkedIn. Twitter, we're kind of relaxed on, but LinkedIn, we try to post some pretty pithy stuff several times a week. And the idea is, our promise is, we stay up all night reading the web, so you don't have to. So go there and get some of the latest news. And then lastly, I want to remind you, come to Tucson, come to the annual conference. This is all going to be about how we re-architect our tech stack. So with that, I'd like to thank David for all of his hard work. I'd like to thank Ellie for hosting us. and thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Please don't hesitate to ask us if there's anything we can do to help your journey. Thanks all.
Thank you all.